Jesus is preaching what is widely known as the Sermon on the Mount. And he claims that he has come to make the law perfect and to fulfill the law. Jesus also says that our righteousness should exceed the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. Now, the scribes and the Pharisees were the Jewish equivalents of the prefects and the Walker scholars at Woodberry. The scribes were the top scholars, and the Pharisees followed and enforced all of the rules of Jewish society. To continue this analogy by suggesting that we should pursue a righteousness that is greater than the scribes and Pharisees, Jesus is claiming that following the rules and getting good grades is not enough to become righteous. In other words, we should aspire for more than a 4.0 GPA, 0 demerits, and titles of honor, such as prefectships or admittance to a selective university. These accolades may indeed be signs of righteousness, but they should not be confused with their substance. Righteousness demands more of us than external metrics can provide. Now, this all may sound fairly philosophical, so Jesus gets practical real quick in order to explain what he means. You have heard it said, Jesus preaches, that you shall not commit adultery. This, of course, is the seventh commandment received by Moses on Mount Sinai, and many of us are probably familiar with this rule. But I say to you, Jesus continues, making it clear that he is expanding on the law in order to make it perfect. Everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. This is a tough standard. And if we are honest with ourselves, everyone in this chapel is probably guilty of adultery. When asked if he had committed adultery in 1976, President Jimmy Carter, a committed Christian, confessed famously and faithfully that he had committed adultery in his heart many times. If we understand lust to be a disordered desire to use someone else's flesh for our own benefit, to treat others like a piece of meat, then there is almost no limit to the ways in which we are capable of committing adultery, both men and women alike. Now, I don't know about you, but when Jesus talks about lust, he gets my attention. Because lust, whether it is at a dance or at the beach or when we are online with our computers, is an issue that is too powerful to ignore. And Jesus is suggesting that it is not a laughing matter. The punishment, after all, for adultery, according to the law, is death. And yet Jesus is preaching a standard of perfection with regard to that law that none of us can possibly meet. To be human is to exist in the flesh, and lust seems to be born inside of us, both biologically and culturally. So how can Jesus demand more from us than we are capable of giving? And how could there possibly be any good news in his Sermon on the Mount? In order to hear the good news in this passage, Christian thought must always begin and end with the cross. When Jesus tells us that he has come to fulfill the law, we understand him to mean that he has come to satisfy the demands of the law. And Jesus makes clear that God's law demands death for anyone who looks at another person with lust, which likely includes everyone in this chapel. With that said, when Jesus is nailed to the cross, he interposes himself for us. He takes our place. And Jesus pays the price that we deserve according to the law. This is what Christians mean when we say that Jesus died for us. In the traditional language that I love, we Christians acknowledge our manifold sins and wickedness, and we accept Jesus as a substitute for ourselves on the cross. Now, it is critically important to understand here that Jesus is not simply telling us that we are deserving of punishment. On the contrary, through the lens of the cross, Jesus is making the most powerful statement possible that we are worthy of love. A love that is so deep that he is willing to offer his life to save ours. The point of the gospel is not to focus on the punishment deserved, but on the love that animates Jesus and frees us from that very punishment. Now, where does this leave us at Woodberry Forest School in Orange, Virginia in 2020? If we accept Jesus' terms and the standard of the law is impossible to meet, and if Jesus has already paid the price for our disobedience, does it matter if we continue to lust? Or has it all been taken care of? And herein lies the mystery of the cross. If we are truly moved to believe that we are worthy of the love that Jesus shows us on the cross, then we find over time that our desires themselves are transformed. While we still may falter, our sin is transformed into a source of gratitude for Jesus' sacrifice already made, rather than a source of fear and shame for punishment that is yet to come. In what is a constant source of wonder for me, gratitude and abundance replace the desire to sin in the life of faith. A man who is truly filled with gratitude and an awareness of his own value does not desire to objectify women, because he is not hungry for that kind of power. And such a man does not need to objectify himself to become desirable to others, because he knows that he is valuable without that kind of degradation. In fancy theological language, Jesus perfects the law in us by fulfilling the law for us, making us paradoxically worthy to live without sin. Let me be clear in closing that appreciating the beauty of another person and manifesting a lust to consume them are two contrary dynamics. It is normal and healthy to find ourselves exploring the depths of human expression. And there are healthy manifestations of sexual desire and development. In fact, Jesus is pointing us towards them by leading us away from our desire for consumption, power, and domination. One step at a time in the life of faith, we find that our ugly, secret habits, born out of fear and insecurity, fall away from our lives, like scales falling off the eyes of Paul, if we are willing to accept God's overwhelming love for us, if we are willing to accept our own infinite dignity and value revealed to us on the cross. In the context of that kind of love, we become capable of loving others as Jesus loved us, and truly life-giving relationships become possible. This is my prayer for all of us. Amen.